During the 18th century, the Order of St. John began to decline as its function of fighting the Muslims became outdated. It came to rely on France, which was an important source of revenue, and the majority of the Order's members were French. The Order received major setbacks following the French Revolution, and by 1792 there were serious financial difficulties. Meanwhile, France and the other major European powers began to take an interest in Malta due to its strategic position in the central Mediterranean and its system of fortifications, which was one of the strongest in Europe. By March 1798, the Order had received information that the French were amassing armaments in Toulon. However, it was believed that they were being prepared for an attack on Portugal and Ireland, and Grand Master Ferdinand von Hompesch-Zubolheim did not believe that an attack on Malta was imminent. On June 6th, a fleet of warships and transports was sighted sailing to Malta. It was the French squadron and military contingent that had sailed from Civitavecchia, but failing to rendezvous with the rest of the French Armada, had arrived off Malta prematurely. The commander of this contingent, General Louis Desaix, sent assurances to the Order that his fleet was on its way to Egypt, but that he would like to take some provisions and water aboard. Permission was granted, and the ships then sailed away from the island until the rest of the French Armada arrived. On June 9, 1798, very large number of vessels, warships, and transports approached Malta from the direction of Gozo, flying the flag of France, under the supreme command of General Napoleon Bonaparte. Grand Master Ferdinand Hompesch hoped that this formidable fleet was on its way to Egypt, as Desaix had assured him 3 days previously. Bonaparte then dispatched a letter to the French consul, Jean-André Carousson, so that he would, in his name, request the Order's permission to allow the French fleet enter the harbors to take on water supplies, although he knew that the Knights couldn't comply with his request. On the morning of June 10th, the French began landing their forces at 4 different locations of the Maltese Islands: St. Paul's Bay, St. Julian's, and Marsaxlokk on mainland Malta, and the area around Ramla Bay on Gozo. All 4 locations were successfully captured by the French. The Maltese did not put a lot of effort to defend the locations because they knew the strength that the French army had was unbeatable. In just 1 day, the French fully captured Malta. The council eventually decided to ask for a truce. The Monsieur de Fremont, the consul of the Batavian Republic, was initially chosen to bear a letter to the French asking for a truce. Due to Fremont's old age, Monsieur Melon, a member of his staff, was sent instead, and he arrived on the French flagship L'Orient at 9 a.m. on the 11th of June. Melon returned with a verbal message that Napoleon would send an envoy, and around 12 p.m. General Junot arrived with a small delegation. He was joined by a number of Knights of the Order who were sympathetic to the French, including Ransijat, who had been freed following his brief imprisonment. Hompesch and members of the state congregation received the envoys, and they agreed on a 24-hour ceasefire, during which negotiations would continue on board L'Orient. On the 12th of June, Napoleon and representatives of the Order and the Maltese signed a convention in which the Order capitulated Valletta and the Maltese Islands fortifications and ceded sovereignty of the islands to the French. The French promised to acquire a principality for the Grand Master as compensation for the loss of Malta. By 13th of June, the French had taken control of the entire island and its fortifications. Following the capture of Malta, Napoleon landed at Valletta on the 13th of June. He stayed on the island for 6 days before most of the French fleet embarked for the campaign in Egypt. General Vaubois remained on the island with a garrison in order to maintain control, thereby establishing the French occupation of Malta. During his short stay, Napoleon dictated instructions which radically reformed the Maltese government and society so as to bring it in line with French Republican ideals. A few days after the capitulation, the Grand Master and many knights left the island, taking with them few movable possessions including some relics and icons. The order received shelter from Paul Rumps of Russia. Most of the Maltese were initially glad at the expulsion of the order and were sympathetic to the French, but this opinion changed after the French refused to pay the order's debts, introduced new taxes, refused to pay pensions, introduced laws restricting the privileges of the church, and began to loot churches. Within 3 months, the Maltese rose up against the occupiers and took control of most of the islands, with British, Neapolitan, and Portuguese assistance. The French garrison in Valletta and the Cotonera withstood the ensuing blockade for 2 years before Vaubois surrendered to the British in 1800, making Malta a protectorate and initiating 164 years of British rule.